All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome in. So the Arizona Pro Day just wrapped up, and we have huge news coming out of it. Tetairoa McMillon clocked in with his 40 time underneath a 4.5 at a 4.48. This is big time, right? I know we're talking about just, hardly any time, right? In like real time, but this stuff is pretty massive, right? When specifically talking about McMillan, this is someone who, you're looking at him as a college prospect. You're looking at what he did against, multiple good defenses, the back-to-back years of crazy production, the yards, the catches, the touchdowns, the highlight reel types of plays, him being a security blanket for Noah Fafita, chuck it up and he's going to come down with it, right? He looks like a freaking power forward out there, just boxing out corners and just making plays on the football, massive red zone threat, all tons of different boxes that you can check, right? When talking about an NFL wide receiver, right? I feel like his explosiveness is a little underrated. He's actually a pretty solid route runner for his size at 6'4", 212. This is someone who doesn't really have, I would say, a weakness when you look at the three phases of the passing game: short, intermediate, and the deep part. He doesn't really lack in any sort of area. You can even take McMillan at his size. Like, this is how shifty of a guy he is. You can actually take him and put him in the slot. Like, that's, now I feel like, full-time slot receiver is probably not the ideal role, but if you want to kind of get creative, if you have an offensive mind, in your building that wants to kind of move McMillan around, not necessarily like a chess piece where you're lining them up all over the place, but you can design packages where you have McMillan in the slot and kind of throw defenses off. He is like a fluid mover with or without the football in his hands, and he has really good hands too, right? The catch radius as well. There's, again, a lot of likable qualities, but all the draft insiders keep harping on one thing, which is the top end speed. And I feel like every single draft cycle, there's one or two prospects that just continuously get like nitpicked. And I feel like it's almost like, what have you done for me lately? Tetairoa McMillon, he didn't work out at the combine. And the biggest question again was the 40 time. Is this guy going to run a, post four, like a 4.5 or higher? And that's what a lot of people just assumed. And again, he's at the combine and he's not running the 40. He's not working out. So people are like, okay, well, he's trying to hide this. He knows internally he's not going to run it. 4.48, right? Big time number for McMillan. So now that we have that number kind of locked in, and again, this is a 40 time, I'm personally, the biggest thing for me is the college games, right? How does a prospect look continuously, week after week, month after month, year after year in the college realm, right? I value that much more than a pro day workout or a combine workout, or even, a private workout, right? Like a specific meeting with the team. Like a 30 visit, right? Things like that. It all comes down to the college tape, to me at least. Now, of course, those other things play a part, but when you're looking at kind of like the pie chart, if you will, again, the college games mean the most or matter the most to me. And when I'm thinking about Tetairoa McMillon going within the top 10, now that this top speed kind of 40 time is, I don't want to say completely debunked, but it's put to bed for now. There's tons of teams that make sense, right? I could see the Raiders jumping up. I honestly, I feel like the Patriots make sense, even though 4 is admittedly too high, in my opinion. But who am I to just, push back and argue with getting Drake May a weapon, which is something that the Patriots have not done up to this point in free agency, right? They spent money on Harold Landry. They spent money on Carlton Davis, on Milton Williams, Spillane, right? The list goes on. Mostly defensive guys, mostly variable guys. But on offense, right? Yeah, of course, Morgan Moses, but where was that go-to wide receiver? Where was that left tackle? It would be nice if the Patriots actually provided May a weapon in the early parts of the draft. The Raiders make sense. The Jets make sense. The Panthers make sense. I would say the New Orleans Saints make sense at 9. Dallas potentially at 12. But let's focus in on the Jets here for a second, right? Because for me, I'm really locking into 3 prospects, and I feel like, pretty much everyone's locking into these same 3 based off of how free agency has gone, right? With the Jets, I would say for now, eliminating the corner 2 need. We also eliminated the quarterback need as well with Justin Fields, again, just for the time being. we don't know exactly how Fields is going to play, but if, say, for example, Shedeur Sanders is on the board or something like that, I feel like, we can sit back and say, okay, we have Fields, we have Tyrod Taylor. We're not really in a position to maybe select a quarterback, and we could just target another position of need. You look at the biggest positions of need right now in this Jets squad: wide receiver, defensive tackle, tight end, right tackle. Those four. Now, when you're kind of skimming through the list, let's just talk about tight end first. Tyler Warren, would he make sense? Absolutely. Absolutely, right? Provides a security blanket for Justin Fields, helps out in both the pass game and the running game. I mean, he's a violent player. He's a physical player. I just love watching him play. Good hands, seeks contact, wants the football in critical situations, does not shy away from the moment. I love Tyler Warren, right? I think he would be a really, really good fit. And I also, again, admittedly, feel like Tyler Warren would be a nice addition for Josh McDaniels' style of offense. So, again, I think maybe 4 is a little too high, but if we see the Patriots potentially trade down or something, I feel like Tyler Warren makes sense. I mean, the bottom line is all these different offensive weapons make sense for a lot of teams that lack offensive weapons, clearly, right? New England, Carolina, New Orleans. But Tyler Warren, I would be totally on board with. Let's talk about defensive tackle, right? Mason Graham, if he's on the board, I think it would be hard to, say we're walking out of day one and the Jets drafted Mason Graham. I think there's going to be a lot of happy fans. I think for me, I would rather target offense and go with a TJ Sanders, a Tyleik Williams if he's there in round 2. I know you can't really project that far into round 2, but I feel much better about the defensive tackles in those mid rounds as opposed to the wide receivers in those mid rounds. That's just me though. But still an option nonetheless. We can talk about right tackle with Armand Membu, right? Someone who has that guard tackle flexibility, but after the combine, it's you feel really, really good about plugging him at the right tackle position and him showing off. I mean, there's tons of traits that Membu would bring to this Jets offense. I'm going to do a whole separate video on Membu. And now that I'm actually thinking about it, I might do separate videos on all these different guys, right? Really in depth, like 10, 15-minute videos. But in any case, Membu would make sense because you're adding that last piece, the cherry on top to the Jets offensive line, which is big time, right? We have Olu, we have AVT, we have Simpson, we have Joe Tippmann, we have a couple of depth pieces behind, right? Okafor being brought in, Josh Myers being brought in. I liked both of those acquisitions. I don't really feel like any of those guys are being signed to become starters, especially in the case with right tackle. Like, you're just kind of seeking one more blue chip player, and Membu checks that box. So do the Jets want to go with that route? I feel like maybe one of the pushbacks is that Membu's only 20 years old. So overall, the line will have a lot of youth on it, which isn't inherently a bad thing. But if there's going to be a learning curve with the new OC who's learning his, kind of, it's pretty much his first rodeo as well, calling plays, installing the offense, working with offensive linemen with this Jets team, right? He hasn't been around. He hasn't done the scouting report on all these guys. Maybe there's going to be somewhat of a rocky road in the early parts of the season. By the way, I'm super sweaty and hot because Florida is super, super hot right now. But bottom line, Membu makes sense for the Jets. And then, of course, we have Tetairoa McMillon. And McMillan is interesting because with all those different positions, right? Tight end, class is deep. Mason Graham, defensive tackle, the class is deep. Right tackle, the class isn't necessarily deep, but in my opinion, the Jets can go out and get Ozzie Trapilo in the mid rounds, who is a starter on this Jets team immediately at right tackle, right? You can go out and select a tackle in rounds 2, maybe even round 3, and land a starter there. But with wide receiver, I feel like the drop-off is there. You can argue Higgins from Iowa State. You could argue Noel from Iowa State. He makes a lot of sense. Matt Golden, I think he's going to be bottom round 1, maybe mid round 1 type of player. There are some receivers, but when I'm specifically thinking about what the Jets need at receiver, and we're going to talk about this whole Allen Lazard curveball in a second, but I think they need a big body playmaker with a big catch radius who can come down with 50-50 balls. Someone who's like a solid counterpart to Garrett Wilson. Not necessarily another, short, shifty slot guy. I think we need to give Justin Fields, give Ingstram a big body on the perimeter, someone who could win one-on-one matchups. If Fields under duress, chuck it up to him. McMillan's coming down with the football. Again, Tet makes sense from that standpoint. Also, you're getting someone with wide receiver 1 potential and you're putting them in a wide receiver 2 role on a cheap deal, right? Theoretically, if you want to pay Garrett Wilson, in my opinion, a contract that he deserves, which is upper $20 million annually, right? That extension kicks in, I would assume, in 2026. So you have Garrett on a cheap deal. You'd have Tet on a cheap deal for 4 to 5 years with a 5th-year option. And Garrett, yes, of course, he's getting paid a lot of money, but you're having essentially 2 wide receiver 1s at your disposal, right? Again, in Wilson and McMillan, both on the outside, which would, hopefully free up some of the middle of the field passing and also the running game as well. Now, the big kind of pushback here is, okay, the Jets want to run the football. Does selecting a wide receiver for a run-heavy team, a run-centric team, make sense? By the way, McMillan's blocking, it's not a humongous weakness to where it's going to impact his draft stock, in my opinion, but it's not something it's not really worth talking about, in my opinion. So does taking a wide receiver for a run-heavy team that wants to run the football, that will have the system built around running the football, make sense? And I think, honestly, the answer is yes. I mean, we all know that the New York Jets have struggled to throw the football. We all know that the Jets need a wide receiver. And even if the Jets want to feed Breece Hall the rock, they want to feed Braylon Allen the rock, right? Ground and pound, really just take a lot of the pressure off of Garrett Wilson and Justin Fields in the passing game. I think one thing that's really important is putting ourselves in the shoes of opposing defensive coordinators, right? If you're playing the Jets, we know that they're going to want to run the football. How do we stop that, right? If they don't have any perimeter, threats, Alan Lazard, Xavier Gibson, even though I like Gibson and Malachi Corley, I don't think either of these guys are keeping DCs up at night. But if you play a team with 2 wide receiver 1 options or, 2 really, really good receivers, for example, Miami, Waddle, Tyreek Hill, Cincinnati, Higgins, Jamar Chase, Minnesota Vikings, Jay Jettas, Addison, right? There's multiple threats. You can't solely lock into one area of the offense and say, we are going to completely neutralize that. Why? Because the offense can then kind of checkmate you and say, you know what? No, we're going to hit hit this wide receiver 2. We're going to make him, kind of the big adjustment mid-game. If you're stopping that, we can just pivot. We can just move. We're not so one-dimensional. So I think if you add a guy in McMillan, it takes pressure off of the running game and it forces the defense to account for a big body on the outside. So here's the beauty in all of it, right? The Jets can go with Membu. They can go with Tyler Warren. It's going to be a great pick. Similar to last year, right? Brian Thomas. I was all over Brian Thomas for the Jets last season. I would have loved that. Brock Bowers, that would have made a ton of sense. Olu would have made it, that clearly worked out in the Jets' favor here. Similar position here. We can go in a bunch of different pathways and probably come out on the other side with a building block for the future. The question is, who makes the most sense? Where's the biggest position of need? And, typically you don't really draft for position of need as your number one priority going into the draft. But I feel like in this class where you have a lot of depth in the mid rounds and not so many top heavy, this isn't really like, this draft is not compared to last season, right? Not really at all. I feel like there's actually a lot of differences. So, this is kind of one of those draft classes where I'm actually cool with the Jets saying, okay, you know what? Let's maybe prioritize position of need this draft class compared to maybe a BPA approach last year, a BPA approach next year. So I really don't think that the Jets can go wrong. I really don't. Alan Lazard, right? Where does he come into play? I personally felt like he was going to be released. I don't know if it's the Jets waiting for Aaron Rodgers to make up his mind. Vikings, Giants, Steelers. And then once they make that move, Rodgers is like, get me get the band back together, trade for Lazard with the Jets, and the Jets are like, okay, we're just going to hang on to him until Rodgers makes his decision and then try to flip him for like a late round pick or something. I don't know what the deal is, but, or I mean, even maybe Muji's looking at this upcoming class and is like, okay, you know what, we're going to come out with a wide receiver, but until we have that for sure answer, we're going to hang on to Lazard for now. But maybe after we get McMillan, or after we get, take your pick on whoever, a boundary wide receiver, now we will move off of Alan Lazard and save whatever it is, $8-9 million against the cap post-draft. So maybe that, I just can't see Lazard on this team next season. All things considered, right, at that price tag, given what we've seen over the last 2 seasons. So anyway, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section on this. I did not mean to make this video 15 minutes. I thought it was going to be like 5 or 6 minutes. But anyway, let me know your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it. And as always, go Jets.